I can still smell the antiseptic. The delivery room lights were so harsh they made every detail impossible to ignore. The nurse smiled politely, sliding a crisp white form toward me, pen balanced on top. "Mr. Carter, we'll just need your signature here. Acknowledgement of paternity." Her words sounded routine, but my world had already cracked open seconds earlier. I looked down at the tiny face swaddled in blankets, and in that instant, I knew. The child was beautiful, innocent, but not mine, not even close. My chest tightened like steel cables pulling in from all sides, yet my hand didn't shake. Years of managing crises had taught me one thing: never sign anything until you know exactly what you're committing to. Lauren's fingers clawed at my wrist, her whisper sharp, urgent. "Michael, just sign. Don't make this difficult." I lifted my eyes, calm but unyielding. "I'll review the paperwork first." The room froze. And that's when the real story began. The antiseptic smell burned the back of my throat, sharp and metallic, as if the air itself wanted to remind me where I was. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, bleaching every shadow, every memory, into something sterile. For a second, I closed my eyes, just long enough for a single image to flash. Lauren walking down the aisle in her ivory lace dress, smiling as if forever actually meant something. That memory flickered like a frame of old film, bright, then gone, replaced by the blinding reality in front of me. The nurse shifted, papers rustling, waiting for my pen to move. My hand stayed still. The room didn't feel like a place of new life anymore. It felt like a stage, and I had just discovered I'd been cast in the wrong role. My heartbeat slowed, steady, deliberate. I wasn't going to improvise lines written by someone else. Not today, not ever again. Her fingers closed around my wrist like a clamp, nails digging into my skin, the same hand that once slipped a wedding ring onto my finger. Her voice dropped low, urgent, rehearsed. "Michael, just sign it. Don't make this difficult. We'll handle everything quietly." The nurse's pen hovered inches from my hand, but I didn't move. My pulse hammered steady, a drumbeat of clarity. I looked at Lauren, really looked. Her hair damp with sweat, her smile gone, eyes hard and glassy. That wasn't the woman I remembered from the aisle. That was someone who had already calculated every excuse. I drew in a breath, let it out slow, and leveled my tone. Not without a DNA test. No anger, no shouting, just fact. The words tasted like iron, sharp but necessary. The nurse blinked, surprised. Lauren's grip tightened, desperate. But I gently pulled free. One sentence had built a wall she could no longer climb. The hallway outside the delivery room was blindingly white, polished floors reflecting every harsh light overhead. The air smelled of floor wax and disinfectant, too clean for the mess my life had just become. Lauren followed close, her gown swishing, her voice pitched soft but urgent, like she was coaching me through a lie I hadn't agreed to tell. "Michael, you're overreacting," she whispered, eyes darting toward the nurses who passed by. "Genetics skip generations. My grandmother's sister had darker features. It's just a throwback. That's all." The words rolled off her tongue too smooth, like lines memorized before a play. Not shock, not confusion. Prepared. I studied her face, noticing the way her mouth tightened just before delivering each explanation. That wasn't instinct. That was strategy. I stopped walking. She nearly bumped into me. "That's not good enough," I said, steady and low. "I see what I see. No story changes that." For the first time, her practiced calm cracked. I stopped in the middle of that sterile hallway, the squeak of a passing cart fading into silence. Lauren's excuses still hung in the air, talk of distant relatives and skipped generations. But I had already made my choice. I turned to her, met her eyes, and spoke evenly. "DNA first, paperwork later." Her lips parted, ready with another prepackaged line, but nothing came out. For a second, I saw something raw slip through the mask. Fear, anger, maybe both, before it snapped shut again. She leaned closer, her whisper sharp, almost a hiss. "Michael, don't do this. You'll regret it." I didn't answer. Words weren't needed anymore. I pulled my arm free, the spot on my wrist still burning from her grip. and took a deliberate step toward the parking garage. Then another. Behind me, her voice followed, pleading, threatening, but I kept walking. Some moments demand silence. Some battles are won simply by refusing to move the line you've drawn. The hospital intercom cracked overhead, flat and impersonal. "Mr. Carter, please report to registration. Mr. Carter." My name echoed down the corridor like a summons, like a trap tightening. Lauren seized on it instantly. "See? They're waiting for you. Just sign the form and we'll deal with this later. Stop embarrassing us both." Her voice was sweet on the surface, but sharp underneath, like sugar hiding a blade. I paused at the intersection. Registration desk to the left, exit signs to the right. My chest rose and fell once, steady. I thought about the folder in the nurse's hand, the pen balanced on top, the way a single stroke of ink could chain me to a lifetime that wasn't mine. Then I turned right, toward the parking garage, toward silence, toward clarity. Behind me I heard her voice rise, half plea, half threat. But I kept walking, because some papers aren't worth signing, and some choices can only be made by leaving. The concrete walls of the parking garage magnified every sound, my footsteps, my breath, the click of my phone unlocking. My hands felt steady, but inside, anger and disbelief churned. I scrolled to the one name I could trust, Tom Harris. He picked up on the second ring. "Mike, what's going on?" I swallowed hard, voice clipped but calm. "Lauren had the baby. It's not mine." And she tried to get me to sign the paperwork anyway. A pause, then Tom's voice sharpened. "Jesus, don't sign a damn thing. Hold on, let me get Richard Hale on the line." 3 quick beeps, and another voice joined, measured, professional, carrying the weight of authority. "This is Richard Hale." Tom filled me in. "Michael, listen carefully. Hospitals will push for that signature. It's procedure. But once you sign, you're legally the father, regardless of biology. We need to act immediately." For the first time that day, I felt something besides betrayal, a plan forming. Richard's voice cut through the static of the garage like a blade, calm, precise, with no room for misunderstanding. "Michael, listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, not until a paternity test confirms the truth." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my knuckles whitening against the concrete pillar. He continued, his words steady, practiced from years in courtrooms. "Hospitals will act like it's routine paperwork, but once your signature is on that line, the law presumes you are the father. Challenging that later is almost impossible. What you need to do right now is simple. Draft a written request for DNA testing, file it with the hospital administration, and demand a date-stamped copy for your records. That copy is your shield." My stomach nodded, but my mind sharpened. For the first time since the delivery room, I felt something solid under my feet. Not comfort, not relief, but clarity, and a way forward. The administrative office smelled faintly of coffee and toner, a world away from the chaos of the delivery room. I stepped up to the counter, slid the typed request across the desk, and forced myself to breathe evenly. The clerk skimmed the page, brows lifting slightly at the bold heading. "Request for paternity testing." Without a word, she reached for a date stamp and pressed it hard against both copies. Thump. The red ink bled into the paper, marking the moment. One copy disappeared into their files, swallowed by the system. The other she pushed back to me. I folded it carefully, slipped it into my breast pocket, and felt the weight settle against my chest. Not heavy, but protective. A single sheet of paper, yet stronger than any shield I'd ever carried. Walking out of that office, I wasn't just a husband blindsided by betrayal anymore. I was a man with proof, with process, with armor, and I intended to use it. Back at the house, the silence pressed down heavier than any courtroom. I dropped my keys on the counter, then cleared the kitchen table with one sweep of my arm. This wasn't a place for dinner anymore. It was a war room. I laid out every piece of evidence I had, bank statements with withdrawals that matched her trips, phone logs with calls I'd never known about, the stamped copy of my DNA request. Each sheet became a weapon, each line of text another defense. In the center, I set my phone, screen dark but recording. Some men might call it paranoia. I called it insurance. Every conversation from this point forward would be documented. Her words, her tone, her threats. The table that once held Sunday breakfasts and late-night laughter now carried battle plans. My appetite was gone, but my focus was sharp. If Lauren thought she could script this story, she hadn't counted on me rewriting the ending. Lauren appeared in the doorway, her hospital wristband still dangling loosely, but her face transformed as soon as she saw the spread of documents on the table. Her eyes shimmered, her lip trembled, and then the tears came, on cue, as if a director had called for them. "Michael," she sobbed, lowering herself into the chair across from me, "how can you do this to us? To me, to your family? That baby is innocent and you're being so cruel." I watched her carefully, not the tears but the timing. They started exactly when my recorder blinked red. She leaned closer, voice cracking with practiced despair. "Please, if you walk away now, everyone will think you abandoned your child. Think of what people will say." I set down the pen I'd been holding, folded my hands, and met her gaze with calm steel. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said evenly. "I'm refusing to be chained to a lie." The mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. Lauren's tears slowed, drying almost as quickly as they'd appeared. She leaned back, folded her arms, and tried on a different mask, injured dignity. "You can't record me without permission," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharper. I reached forward, tapped the phone lying between us on the table, the small red light blinking steadily. "This is a one-party consent state," I said evenly. "That means I can." And I did. For the first time since the hospital, she faltered. Her eyes flicked to the papers scattered across the table, then back to the recorder, calculating. The cracks in her performance showed. Too quick a glare, too fast a breath. I didn't need to raise my voice. The blinking red light did the work for me. Every contradiction, every denial, every threat, it was all being preserved. Lauren shifted in her seat, her expression hardening. The mask she'd worn for years slipped, revealing the steel and desperation underneath, and I finally saw her clearly. The next morning I sat in Richard Hale's downtown office, the smell of leather chairs and fresh coffee grounding me more than I expected. Diplomas lined the wall, but it was the big desk between us that mattered now. Richard spread a set of folders across the polished wood, his voice steady, professional. "Michael, time is not on our side," he said, tapping a calendar with his pen. "You've got a 30-day window. That's it. Within those 30 days, we file for adjudication of paternity and a financial freeze. After that, the presumption of paternity becomes much harder to challenge." The words landed heavy, but clear. 30 days. That was the runway between freedom and a lifetime of lies. Richard leaned forward, eyes locking on mine. "Here's the plan. First, maintain your request for DNA testing. Second, we file today for a freeze on all joint assets. Protect your money before she tries to move it. Third, document everything." I nodded slowly. For once, the battlefield felt mapped. That same afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, still covered in evidence folders, and began dismantling the life Lauren and I had built, one brick at a time. Richard's instructions echoed in my head. Protect yourself first. Step 1 was simple, but symbolic. I opened a brand new bank account in my name only, transferring my direct deposits before she could touch a dollar. Step 2, I changed every password, email, insurance, even the Wi-Fi. Years of shared convenience turned into vulnerabilities overnight. Now, each lock clicked shut under my control. Step 3 hurt the most. I listed every joint asset, our savings, the car, the house equity. On paper, it looked like stability. In reality, it was a ledger of betrayal. I paused, staring at the numbers. 5 years of shared effort now reduced to an inventory for division. Still, each entry was a safeguard, another wall between me and the trap she'd set. Marriage had been built brick by brick. Now I was tearing it down the same way, deliberate, one piece at a time. Late that night, I sat hunched over the glow of my laptop, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I pulled up our shared cell phone account, scrolling through months of call logs. At first it looked ordinary, quick calls to family, work numbers, routine chatter. But then, the pattern began to reveal itself. One number kept reappearing. Same area code, same 10 digits, scattered across nights when I was hundreds of miles away on business trips. The timing was too neat. Long calls just after hotel check-ins, shorter bursts around midnight. I highlighted each entry, printing the records until the paper tray rattled empty. The more I mapped it, the clearer it became. This wasn't random, and it sure wasn't family. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, the fluorescent desk lamp buzzing above me. The calls lit up the timeline like runway lights, guiding me straight to the truth I'd been avoiding. Ryan Miller wasn't just a suspicion anymore. He was a pattern, blinking red. The next morning, sunlight cut across the blinds, striping my kitchen table in pale gold. The papers from last night were still there, a battlefield frozen mid-fight. I reached for the wall calendar hanging by the fridge, the one Lauren used to mark anniversaries and dinner plans. Now it held only one date that mattered. With a red marker in hand, I drew a hard circle around the deadline Richard had warned me about. 30 days. The ink bled slightly into the paper fibers, thick and unbroken, like a target or a warning sign. I stood there staring at it, the number glowing like a countdown clock in my mind. 30 days to prove the truth. 30 days to stop a lie from chaining me for life. 30 days to rebuild the ground under my feet. I capped the marker and pinned the calendar back in place. Every morning from here on out, I'd cross off another day, measuring not time lost but freedom gained. The first 2 days after I drew that red circle on the calendar, my phone stayed silent. Not a word from Lauren, no calls, no texts, just the kind of empty quiet that feels less like peace and more like strategy. I knew the silence wouldn't last. On the third morning, it broke. "We can work this out. Please, let's talk." Her words poured in, sweet and pleading, painting herself as the victim, as if I was the one tearing our family apart. By evening, the tone had shifted. "You're making a huge mistake, Michael. Everyone will think you're heartless." By day 5, the mask dropped completely. "You'll regret this. You can't just walk away." The threats came sharp, desperate. I didn't reply once. Instead, I saved every message, screenshot after screenshot, organizing them into folders with timestamps. Some men would argue back. I chose documentation over confrontation, because lies change tone, but evidence never does. By midnight, the house felt too still, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak in the walls. I sat at the kitchen table under the cold glow of my laptop, papers spread like a crime board around me. The screen's blue light painted everything in a pale, unnatural hue. I clicked through bank statements, phone records, and emails, tracing lines between dates and numbers. The deeper I went, the less it looked like coincidence and the more it resembled choreography. Uber rides lining up perfectly with my business trips. Withdrawals timed to the hour I boarded flights. Her text messages, always cheerful, always scripted, landing just as his calls dropped off. It didn't feel messy or accidental. It felt prepared, staged months in advance, like a performance I'd been paying for without knowing I'd bought a ticket. My stomach turned. I leaned back in the chair, eyes burning from exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see it all, to prove to myself this wasn't paranoia. It was a plan. Sleep never came. At 2 a.m, I pushed back from the paperwork and noticed Lauren's iPad still plugged in by the couch, right where she always left it. For a long moment, I just stared at it, debating. Even after everything, part of me felt like opening it would cross a line. But then I remembered Richard's words, document everything. Her passcode hadn't changed. A swipe and 4 digits and I was inside. Photos, Pinterest boards, recipes, it all looked harmless, almost domestic. But tucked between the folders was one that didn't belong, a simple gray icon labeled Plan B. My pulse kicked hard in my chest. I tapped it open. The folder's timestamp read 6 months old. Inside were hundreds of screenshots, messages between Lauren and Ryan Miller, each one carefully saved, organized by date. I scrolled through the first few files, my hands trembling even as my eyes sharpened. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was proof, premeditated, cataloged, undeniable. I scrolled deeper into the folder, each screenshot darker than the last. Then I found it, the message that cut through every excuse she had rehearsed. Ryan's text glowed against the screen. "What if he notices at the hospital?" Lauren's reply came fast, confident. "He won't. He always does the right thing. He'll sign at the hospital." My throat went dry. They hadn't just gambled on my trust. They had planned to weaponize it. Every squeeze of her hand in that delivery room, every urgent whisper to just sign. It was all part of a script, rehearsed months in advance. I scrolled further. Hotel receipts exchanged, location pins dropped, casual lines about how easy it would be once my name inked the certificate. Their contempt leaked from every word. The tablet felt heavy in my hands, heavier than any betrayal I had imagined. This wasn't a mistake. It was design, and I had nearly signed my life away to it. The more I read, the colder my blood ran. Every message between Lauren and Ryan wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. They knew my weakness, or what they thought was my weakness, my integrity. "He always does the right thing," she had written, confident as if my decency was a lock she already had the key for. They weren't planning on me breaking. They were counting on me bending, signing quietly, accepting responsibility because that's what a good man would do. I felt sick, realizing my character had been drafted into their plan like a weapon turned against me. My trust had become their leverage. But if they underestimated me once, they wouldn't do it twice. I started taking screenshots of every file, every message, sending them to my email one by one. Backups, time-stamped, secure. The folder Plan B wasn't just theirs anymore. By the time I set the tablet down, my chest burned, but my resolve was steel. Their trap had been built on my integrity. My defense would be built on proof. The next morning, Richard Hale ushered me into his conference room. Sunlight caught the brass plate on the door, and for a second I thought about how much weight a name can carry. His meant protection, mine meant survival. On the long oak table lay 3 thick black binders. Richard slid them toward me one by one, each tabbed with colored markers. "We organize this chronologically," he said, tapping the first. Binder 1, timeline, your trips, her activity, the overlap. Binder 2, receipts, Uber rides, hotel charges, withdrawals. Binder 3, communication, screenshots of chats, call logs, every word she and Ryan exchanged. He opened them in sequence, laying the pages side by side. The pattern was undeniable. A red thread might as well have run straight through each line of evidence, connecting motive to method, intention to action. Richard leaned back, his voice low but firm. "Judges don't rule on feelings, Michael. They rule on clarity. And this," he tapped the stack of binders, "is clarity." For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Richard was still arranging the binders when I pulled out my phone. "There's more," I said, scrolling to the barrage that had come in just this morning. I laid the screen flat on the table so he could read for himself. Lauren's messages filled the thread, long, sharp paragraphs, each one accusing, attacking. "You're destroying our family. Everyone will know you walked out on your newborn. You're cold, heartless, less than a man." Not once did she deny what we'd already uncovered. Not a single line defending the truth, only lines crafted to wound mine. Richard skimmed, jaw tightening. Classic manipulation. Notice what's missing? No rebuttal, no explanation, just pressure. I nodded, the familiar ache pulsing at my temples. It still hurt to read, but the hurt wasn't enough to blind me anymore. I took screenshots of every message, dropping them into the evidence folder on my laptop. Emotions could be twisted, accusations could shift, but the silence of her non-denial, that was permanent. By noon, the conference room smelled like paper and fatigue. I hadn't eaten since yesterday's hospital coffee. A knock broke through the hum of the air vent, and Tom stepped in with a takeout bag and 2 waters. He didn't ask. He set the box in front of me, popped it open, and slid over a fork. "Eat," he said. "Courtrooms aren't won on an empty stomach." I tried to wave him off. He stared me down until I took a bite. The simple heat of pasta steadied me more than I wanted to admit. Tom leaned back, eyes on the binders, then on me. "Look," he said, voice low. "You don't have to argue with anyone anymore. Not her. Not her story. Tomorrow, let the evidence talk. That's what it's for." I exhaled, tension leaking out in small clicks. He was right. I didn't need speeches or anger. I needed sleep, food, and a steady pulse. Tom capped it with a nod. "You've done the hard part. Now you just show up." That night, back in the rental house, the air felt heavy with silence. I couldn't sleep. not with tomorrow pressing on my chest like a weight. Instead, I found myself standing in the bathroom, the mirror fogged slightly from a hot shower I never finished. The man staring back at me looked older than 35, jaw tight, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but steadier than they had been days ago. I straightened my shoulders and spoke aloud, voice low but firm. I stand by my decision to request DNA testing. I will not sign away my future based on lies. I choose facts, not fear. I choose DNA, not deception. The words sounded strange at first, but the more I repeated them, the stronger they became, like steel hammered into shape. My reflection didn't flinch. I practiced again, each line sharper, cleaner. Tomorrow I wouldn't need anger. I'd need clarity. And tonight, clarity was exactly what I was carving into my bones. The oak-paneled courtroom felt colder than the November wind outside. Every sound carried, heels on tile, papers shuffling, the low murmur of attorneys conferring. I sat at the table beside Richard Hale, my binder of evidence stacked neatly in front of me. Behind us, Tom's steady presence anchored me, a silent reminder I wasn't standing alone. The bailiff called out, "All rise." Chairs scraped back in unison. The heavy door at the rear opened, and Judge Thompson entered, black robes trailing like shadows. She moved with measured steps, her eyes sweeping the room, weighing everything before a word was spoken. When she settled at the bench, the silence thickened, pressing down on every shoulder in the room. I felt my pulse in my ears, but my face stayed calm. This was no longer a marriage fight in whispers. This was law, wood, paper, and truth. And as Judge Thompson adjusted her glasses and nodded for us to be seated, I knew the weight of every decision had just shifted to this moment. Richard rose smoothly when Judge Thompson gave the nod. His voice carried the calm precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. "Your Honor," he began, holding up a sealed envelope, "we submit into evidence the paternity report issued by the state-certified lab." The clerk crossed the room, heels clicking against the polished floor, and placed the document into the judge's hands. The paper rustled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the sterile black print. The language was clinical, stripped of feeling. Probability of paternity, 0%. No emotion, no adjectives, just numbers, science, fact. And yet, sitting at that table, those words hit harder than any fist could. I kept my eyes forward, my jaw steady, even as Lauren shifted beside her attorney. Her knuckles went white against the edge of the table, lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The truth had spoken in medical ink, colder than steel. The first domino had fallen. Richard didn't pause after the DNA report landed. He opened the second binder, the one thick with tabs and highlighted pages, and handed a stack to the clerk. "Your Honor," he said, his tone calm but sharpened for impact, "we also submit digital correspondence and financial records, evidence of premeditation." The courtroom projector flickered to life, filling the wall with screenshots from Lauren's own tablet. At the top, bold letters, Plan B. Judge Thompson adjusted her glasses, reading aloud, "He'll sign at the hospital, then we're set." The words hung in the air like smoke no one wanted to breathe. Richard turned a page, revealing receipts, Uber trips to the Westbrook Hotel, credit card charges timed exactly to my out-of-town conferences. Dates and locations lined up like pins on a map, each one drawing a straight red line from deception to design. Lauren shifted in her chair, jaw tight, her lawyer whispering fast at her ear. But no amount of whispering could erase the clarity now glowing on the courtroom wall. Lauren's attorney shot to his feet, voice polished but strained. "Your Honor, my client was emotional, vulnerable, under extreme stress during her pregnancy. These messages cannot be taken as proof of intent, only the ramblings of a frightened woman." The words hung in the room, an attempt to smother the evidence under a blanket of sympathy. For a moment, silence followed. Then Judge Thompson lifted one of the transcripts, her glasses sliding down just enough for her gaze to slice the air. She read slowly, her voice flat, deliberate. "He'll sign at the hospital, then we're set." The attorney shifted, fumbling for another objection, but the judge's hand came up, palm out, final, unyielding. "Spare me theatrics," she said coldly. "This court does not excuse deception as mere emotion." The entire room seemed to contract around her words. Lauren dropped her eyes, the mask of tears gone, replaced with a stillness that looked a lot more like panic. Judge Thompson set the transcript down, her expression carved in stone. She leaned forward, her gavel poised but not yet striking. This court has reviewed the DNA evidence, the documented communications, and the financial records submitted. The conclusion is clear. Her eyes moved deliberately from Richard to me, then to Lauren. Mr. Carter is not the biological father of the child in question. Accordingly, he shall not be listed on the birth certificate, nor held responsible for legal paternity. The temporary freeze on joint accounts will remain in place and shall be converted into a permanent protective order until divorce proceedings are concluded. The words echoed through the room, final and unshakable. My shoulders loosened for the first time in weeks, the tension leaving like air from a sealed chamber. Lauren's attorney slumped, whispering frantically at her side, but Judge Thompson raised her gavel. Bang! The sound cracked like a rifle shot. Truth, carved into law, could not be undone. The gavel struck once, sharp and final, and the sound rolled through the courtroom like a bell tolling at dawn. It wasn't just wood hitting wood, it was the weight of judgment, cleansing and undeniable. For weeks, my shoulders had carried a load that ground me down every hour of every day. With that single strike, it was as if someone had lifted the stones off my back. I exhaled slowly, the breath trembling out of me, realizing I'd been holding it since the nurse first offered me that pen in the delivery room. My spine straightened, not out of pride, but relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one on trial, not in the law, not in truth, not even in my own mind. Across the aisle, Lauren sat stiff, her face carved into silence, but her eyes betrayed the crack. Panic, fury, loss. For me, though, it was simpler. The gavel hadn't just closed her case. It had opened my freedom. When the judge adjourned, the shuffle of papers and chairs filled the silence, but I barely heard it. My ears still rang with the echo of that gavel, like a bell cleansing everything it touched. Tom rose behind me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. No words, just a squeeze, steady and grounding. I gathered the binders Richard had left stacked neatly, each one heavy but somehow lighter now that their purpose had been fulfilled. We walked the aisle together, the weight of curious eyes trailing us, but I didn't look back. There was no victory lap, no celebration, just clean air as the courtroom doors opened and the November chill swept across my face. Outside, the world looked ordinary again. Cars passing, people crossing the street, leaves skittering across the courthouse steps. Yet for me, it was the first moment in months that felt unchained. Tom gave me a nod, simple and solid. I returned it. Some exits don't need noise. They need silence, clean, sharp, and final. And the rental house was smaller than what I'd left behind, but when I turned the key and stepped inside, it smelled of paint and fresh carpet instead of lies. The rooms were plain, almost bare, white walls, empty shelves, echoes where laughter used to live. Yet it was mine, clean and untainted. Out back, sunlight poured into a yard that surprised me with its openness. The soil looked dark, rich, the kind of ground that could hold roots. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, letting the breeze wash the courthouse air off me. At the garden center that afternoon, I chose a young red maple. The clerk said, "These grow straight and strong if you give them the right start." I nodded, knowing he wasn't just talking about trees. That evening I set the sapling into the earth, packing the soil around its roots with steady hands, a symbol of something simple, something honest, growth after ruin. The maple sapling swayed slightly as the evening breeze picked up. I knelt beside it, driving a wooden stake into the soil with a steady rhythm. Each strike of the mallet echoed like punctuation marks, periods at the end of a chapter I'd finally closed. I tied the young trunk loosely, giving it support but leaving enough slack for growth. Too much restraint and it would never learn to stand on its own. Too little, and it might snap before it had a chance. Balance. That's what survival required. I looked at the tender leaves catching the last light of the day. "The child's innocent," I murmured into the quiet yard. "But your choices weren't." The words weren't bitter, just truthful. The baby deserved life without lies. But Lauren's decisions, those were hers to live with, not mine to carry. I pressed the soil firm around the roots, wiping dirt across my palms. The tree was straight now, so was I. 2 days later, Tom dropped by with coffee and the kind of look that told me he had news I wouldn't like, but needed to hear. He set the cup down on the porch railing. "Word's out," he said. "Lauren's been leaning on Ryan, pushing him to step up. He wants nothing to do with it." The words settled heavy, though not surprising. I let the silence stretch, watching the young maples sway in the breeze. Some people would call it karma. I didn't. Karma sounded mystical, like some cosmic balancing act. What I saw was simpler, sharper. Consequences. You build a trap, you fall into it. You gamble with lies, you pay with loss. "The child's still innocent," I said finally, my voice steady. "But he isn't going to carry her either. That's on her now." Tom nodded, sipping his coffee. "Hard road." "Hard road," I agreed, tightening the stake around the tree. "But not mine anymore." The first weekend in the new place, I walked through each room slowly, letting the silence settle. No perfume clinging to curtains, no staged smiles in photo frames, no arguments echoing off the walls. Just blank space and sunlight, honest in its emptiness. In the kitchen, the table was still bare. No stacks of bank statements waiting like accusations. No folders labeled Plan B. Just wood and clean air. I wiped it down anyway, as if scrubbing off ghosts that never lived here. The bedroom smelled faintly of new paint. The closet was half empty, hangers spaced far apart. Instead of reminding me of what was gone, it felt like an invitation. Space waiting for clothes I'd choose, memories I'd create. The quiet was different here. Not tense, not staged, just quiet. I stood in the center of the living room, hands on my hips, and let myself breathe it in. For the first time, the silence wasn't manipulation. It was mine. Morning light spilled across the bare kitchen table, catching the red circle still marked on my wall calendar. The deadline had passed. The judgment was final. My freedom was intact. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug I'd bought at a thrift store on move-in day. The taste was sharp, grounding. As I wrapped my hands around the ceramic, I caught myself staring at my palms, calloused from years of work, scarred from choices made and endured. A lesson had etched itself there, invisible but undeniable. Truth hurts briefly. Lies steal years. Convenience had been the bait Lauren dangled. The just sign it, don't make a scene. But the truth, the hard, unflinching truth, was what saved me. It cut deep, yes, but it healed clean. I sipped again, watching steam curl in the sunlight. My new life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And that honesty, even when it stung, was worth more than every lie dressed up as love. One quiet evening, I gathered the binders, receipts, and transcripts that had carried me through the storm. Each page was a blade I once had to wield, but now they were just paper, sharp only if left scattered. I stacked them carefully into a metal lockbox I'd bought at the hardware store, the kind with a key you can feel solid in your palm. As the lid shut with a dull click, I realized I wasn't burying the past. I was fencing it in, drawing a line it could no longer cross. The box slid onto the shelf in my closet, behind a row of clean shirts and work boots. Not to be forgotten, never that, but to stand as a guardrail, proof of what I survived, and a warning against ever letting convenience blind me again. When I turned the key and pocketed it, a strange calm settled in. The past wasn't chasing me anymore. It was locked up, guarding the path forward. A week after the ruling, my phone buzzed again. Lauren's name lit the screen, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But curiosity tugged, and I opened the thread. The tone was different this time. No accusations, no rage, just a new angle, dressed up in softer words. "We need to talk for the sake of the family." A few minutes later, "This isn't about us anymore, it's about the child." The phrases looked polished, almost copy and paste, like she'd borrowed them from some article on co-parenting. But beneath the words, I could see the same hollow structure. Family without truth isn't family, it's performance. Parenting without honesty isn't parenting, it's strategy. I saved the messages anyway, sliding them into the evidence folder already locked in the vault. Not because I needed more proof for court, but because every text reminded me of the lesson carved into my skin. Without truth, even the most noble words collapse into noise. The next volley came not with tears or pleas, but with a sharper edge. My phone buzzed late afternoon. If you don't stop this, I'll tell your company everything. Your family too. Everyone will know you abandoned us. I sat at my kitchen table, the maple sapling visible through the window, its leaves trembling in the wind. For a moment, the words stung, because reputation, once stained, can be hard to wash clean. But then I glanced at the lockbox in the closet, heavy with evidence, and the sting evaporated. Rumors are smoke, documents are fireproof. I didn't type a single reply. Instead, I pulled out a folder already prepared by Richard, labeled in thick black marker, Protective Exhibits. Inside were the DNA report, the transcripts, the screenshots, each page stamped, notarized, sealed. If she wanted to spread stories, I was ready. I didn't need to shout, threaten, or plead. My answer was already written, filed, dated, and undeniable. A week after the ruling, I sat across from Richard in his office again. The blinds were half drawn, letting in strips of pale afternoon light that cut across the mahogany desk. The stacks of binders were gone now, replaced by a thinner folder marked Temporary Settlement. Richard slid the documents toward me, his tone calm, matter-of-fact. The freeze on joint accounts is locked in. These terms outline temporary division until the divorce is finalized. No surprises, no exposure. I leafed through each page slowly, eyes tracing the language, dates, percentages, protective clauses. Nothing hidden in fine print, nothing waiting to ambush me. For once, the paperwork in front of me wasn't a trap, it was a shield. I picked up the pen, held it for a beat, then signed with steady strokes. No hesitation, no fog of manipulation, just clear ink on clean lines. Richard gathered the folder with a nod. "This closes the financial battlefield," he said. I exhaled, one more chain cut loose. It came late at night, tucked between silence and storms, a text from Lauren. "I'm sorry." 2 words, but the weight behind them wasn't repentance, it was leverage. The next line gave her away. "If you'd just let this go, we could move forward, for the baby, for appearances." I stared at the screen, the glow casting my kitchen in pale blue. It wasn't contrition. It was bargaining, an attempt to buy back control with currency she no longer held. I let the message sit there for a full minute before setting the phone down. No typing, no anger, no counter, just clarity. The next morning, through Richard, I delivered my final line. All communication goes through counsel. No debates, no more emotional quicksand. If she wanted to speak, she would do it in the language of law, not manipulation. The apology dissolved into silence, and for once that silence wasn't a threat. It was closure, clean and sharp. There's a truth about men in this country that never makes it into TV dramas or bar gossip. We don't need to scream, break bottles, or torch bridges to prove strength. What we need is a process. Steps, documentation, doors that close clean, without hinges rattling. In that delivery room, she counted on my emotions, on a burst of guilt or a surge of pride, to trap me. But the male psyche, at least for men like me, isn't wired that way. We're builders, planners, soldiers of routine. We don't swing wild. We measure twice, cut once. That's why I chose the paper trail over the shouting match. Evidence over chaos. It isn't weakness to keep calm, it's control. And control is the one thing no liar can handle. So I didn't yell, I didn't curse. I gathered receipts, filed motions, locked boxes, and when the final door shut, it stayed shut. That's how a man ends a betrayal, not with noise, but with certainty. 2 weeks after the ruling, I was sorting tools in the garage when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Dan Roberts, my old supervisor from the rig days. I hesitated, then answered. "Mike." His voice carried the same gravel tone I remembered from the oil fields. "Heard about your situation. Rough ride." I braced for pity, but instead came a low chuckle. "Proud of you, son. You handled it the right way, through facts, not fists. Too many men would have drowned this kind of pain in whiskey and bad decisions. You didn't." I leaned against the workbench, the maple tree swaying just outside the window. "Didn't feel strong at the time," I admitted. "Strength isn't about noise," Dan said. "It's about discipline when it would be easier to self-destruct. You kept your hands steady." When the call ended, I set the phone down, feeling taller somehow. Recognition from a man I once admired carried more weight than 1,000 rumors ever could. One Saturday night, I found myself behind the wheel with no destination. The highway stretched empty, headlights carving a narrow path through the dark. Without planning it, I took the old turnoff, the road that led straight past the house I used to call home. As I slowed near the familiar curve, the porch light glowed in the distance, soft and yellow against the brick. For months, even the thought of that house made my chest tighten, eyes sting, but this time, it didn't. I rolled past at the speed limit, hands steady on the wheel, radio low. No urge to stop, no need to look twice. The life inside those walls wasn't mine anymore, and for the first time, I felt no grief about it, just distance, clean and sharp. In the rearview mirror, the house slipped away, shrinking into the dark until it was nothing but a faint pinprick of light. My eyes stayed dry. My road stayed straight. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, a cardboard box sat square on my porch, sealed with tape but sagging at the corners. No return label, no note, just there. I carried it inside, the weight familiar before I even cut it open. Wedding photos, albums, frames, the glossy prints of smiles that no longer belonged to me. Our faces locked in still life vows, promises already broken by the time the shutter clicked. For a moment, I considered tossing the whole box straight in the trash. But instead, I sifted through page by page. I wasn't looking for nostalgia. I was looking for signs. The shadows I'd missed, the stiffness in her smile, the small tells my gut had flagged but my heart had ignored. In the end, I kept only a thin envelope of photos. Not as mementos of love, but as reminders, evidence of what I should have seen sooner. The rest, I taped shut and set by the curb. Some history isn't worth keeping. The clang of iron echoed through the gym, steady as a drumbeat. I wrapped my hands around the barbell, knuckles whitening, and drove the weight up until my arms trembled. My lungs burned, but I forced the air in slow, steady pulls. Inhale, exhale, rhythm locked in. For months, my body had carried stress like lead, every breath shallow, every muscle tense from holding back fury. Now, under the fluorescent lights and chalk-scented air, I let the discipline return. The bar wasn't punishment, it was process. Each rep was a line drawn between past chaos and present order. My body remembered before my mind did. Pain can be directed, sweat can rinse out poison. With every controlled breath, my thoughts steadied, shoulders squared. The betrayal still lived in memory, but it didn't own my pulse anymore. Here, with sweat streaking my shirt and calluses biting the steel, I wasn't a victim or a defendant. I was simply a man rebuilding. One breath, one rep, one discipline at a time. Saturday morning found me sliding into a cracked leather booth at the corner diner down the street. The bell above the door jingled behind me, the smell of bacon and burnt toast mixing with the sharper scent of fresh coffee. The waitress poured without asking, her pot steady, steam curling up into the sunlight that streaked through the blinds. I wrapped my hands around the chipped white mug and took a long sip. No ceremony, no imported beans, just straight black coffee, bitter and honest. When the bill came, it was small enough to fold into a pocket without thinking twice. No hidden costs, no fine print, no signatures meant to chain me to someone else's lie. I sat there for a while, watching families filter in, the clink of forks and hum of conversations filling the space. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. Sometimes the things that last aren't the grand gestures or the staged promises. Sometimes it's a cheap cup of coffee that tastes like freedom. That evening, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once sorted evidence, but now the surface was clear except for a single notebook and pen. No binders, no stamped exhibits, just blank pages waiting for something new. I started to write, not about the past, but about the lines I would never cross, or let anyone else cross again. At the top, I scrawled the words, "Boundaries for tomorrow." 5 rules emerged, clean and deliberate. Honesty first. No truth, no foundation. Respect always. Without it, love collapses. Fight fair. Arguments aren't wars, they're tests of character. Loyalty matters. Trust is earned once, lost forever. Keep laughter, because life without humor is just survival. I read the list twice, then closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf beside the lockbox. The difference was stark. One held the scars of betrayal, the other the blueprint for what I'd build next. News reached me through Richard a few days later, almost like a footnote in an email. Ryan had changed his number. No forwarding address, no new trail to follow. He'd simply slipped out of reach, leaving Lauren with the silence she had once tried to bury me under. For a moment, I thought about how easily men like him walk away, how quickly they fold once the weight isn't theirs to carry. But then I caught myself. His vanishing act wasn't my lesson to shoulder. The courtroom, the binders, the maple tree in my yard, those were my chapters. Ryan's disappearance was just a postscript, proof that the path of least resistance always collapses under its own weight. I closed the laptop, let the news fade into the background, and stepped outside. The maple was catching more light now, its leaves stronger, its trunk straighter. Ryan's lesson belonged to him. Mine was still here, rooted in the soil, growing toward tomorrow. A week after the dust of court had settled, I stopped by Richard's office one last time. His desk was cleaner now, no binders stacked like barricades, just a single folder marked finalized. He leaned back in his chair, glasses perched low on his nose, and gave me the kind of look that carried weight without words. Then he said, calm but sharp as steel, "You shut that 30-day window just in time. Another week, another signature, and you could have lost 30 years instead." The words hit harder than any ruling. 30 days versus 30 years. That was the math of betrayal. I nodded, letting the truth settle deep. Feels like I dodged a life sentence. "You did more than dodge," Richard replied. "You built your defense the way most men never think to, by staying steady. That's rare." When I walked out into the sunlight, the folder tucked under my arm, it felt less like paperwork and more like proof of survival. The sun was sliding low, painting the horizon in copper and violet when Tom showed up with a six-pack. We settled into the porch chairs, the maple saplings swaying gently in the yard. He cracked open 2 cans and slid one across to me. For a while we drank in silence, the fizz of beer and the chirp of crickets filling the space where words didn't need to live. Then Tom turned, his expression steady, voice even. "You didn't lose a family, Mike," he said. "You avoided being locked in one that was already broken." I let the words sit, heavy but true. He wasn't offering pity, he was cutting clean through the fog, the way only a friend can. I nodded, tapping my can lightly against his. "Here's to freedom that doesn't feel like loss." The sky deepened, stars beginning to show. For the first time, the porch light behind me wasn't a reminder of betrayal. It was a beacon of my own choosing. The hose hissed softly as I twisted the valve, sending a thin stream of water down into the soil around the young maple. The earth drank it in greedily, darkening shade by shade, the way a dry throat swallows its first gulp after a long day in the sun. I stood there barefoot on the cool grass, letting the spray mist my hands, my shirt, even my face. The tree needed water, and I realized I did too, but not the kind that came from a faucet. What I craved was truth, raw, unfiltered, sometimes bitter, but always clean. Lies had left me parched, hollowed out by months of performance and manipulation. Truth, though it cut, was sustenance. It filled, it steadied. As the roots soaked, I imagined them pushing deeper, searching, anchoring. The maple would grow because it reached for what was real beneath the surface. So would I. When I shut the hose off, the air felt clearer. My thirst wasn't gone, but it was finally pointed in the right direction. There was no celebration, no champagne corks popping, no fireworks lighting the sky. My victory arrived in silence, clean and sharp, the kind you can only recognize when the noise finally dies down. I sat on the porch as the evening settled, the air cooling, the maple's young leaves rustling softly in the breeze. No buzzing phone, no threats in my inbox, no manipulative voice in my ear. Just stillness. For years I'd mistaken noise for proof of life. Arguments, apologies, promises, and lies layered over each other like static. But now, in this quiet, I understood. This was the sound men spend their whole lives searching for. Not applause, not revenge, just peace. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the hum of crickets, the faint bark of a dog down the street. My chest rose and fell, steady and unhurried. The war was over, and the silence, this simple, unadorned silence, was the truest victory I had ever known. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with nothing but a lined notebook and a pen. No court filings, no binders, no receipts, just me and a blank page. For the first time in months, I wasn't writing for lawyers or judges. I was writing for myself. The words came slowly at first, then steadier, as if my hand already knew what my heart had been trying to say. Don't ever sign out of fear. Don't sign because you're lonely or because silence feels too heavy. Sign only when there is truth. Only when respect sits across the table from you. Only when loyalty is present, not promised. And when laughter is real, not rehearsed. That's when a signature matters, not before. I read the lines twice, then folded the page and slipped it into the vault beside the old evidence. One folder guarded my past. This letter would guard my future. I've learned that betrayal never arrives with a warning label. It creeps in quietly, through details most people dismiss. That's why my future isn't about building walls. It's about tuning my ears, my eyes, my gut. I wrote myself another clause in that notebook, right under the boundary rules. Pay attention to the small signals. A perfume that lingers when it shouldn't. A calendar that skips a beat. An explanation too smooth, rehearsed like lines from a play. Those aren't accidents. They're threads. And if you pull gently, the whole fabric unravels. I used to ignore them, telling myself not to be paranoid, not to rock the boat. But silence cost me more than truth ever could. Now, the signals won't slip past me. Not because I'm bitter, but because I know vigilance is respect for myself. The future doesn't scare me anymore. With the right clauses written in my own hand, I know the next chapter will start clean, not blind. Monday morning, I walked into a new office building, the kind with fresh carpet and humming lights that still smelled faintly of paint. The desk waiting for me wasn't the old one cluttered with shared bills and reminders of a double life. It was clean, spare, mine. The project binder on top was thick, deadlines highlighted, tasks stacked in bullet points. For the first time in months, I felt eager to dig in. Work had always been a place of order for me. Clear goals, measurable results, no lies hidden in the margins. Before I opened the binder, I grabbed a sticky note and wrote one more item for the checklist. Self-preservation. Not in bold, not circled, but first on the list. Because protecting myself wasn't paranoia anymore. It was procedure. As the coffee cooled beside me and my pen started moving, I realized this was more than just a return to work. It was a return to myself, one task at a time. On my nightstand, the phone lay face up, black screen reflecting only the ceiling light above. For months, that rectangle of glass had been a battlefield, buzzing at midnight with threats, flooding at dawn with pleas, always alive with someone else's chaos. Tonight, it stayed dark. No calls, no texts, no carefully crafted urgent notifications. Just silence. I realized then how different this quiet was. Before, her silence had been a weapon, a way to control, to punish, to make me chase. Now, silence was mine. Chosen, guarded, earned. Not a punishment, but a right. I picked the phone up once, checked the time, then set it back down without a second glance. For the first time in years, the device wasn't a leash. It was just an object, resting, powerless. Outside, the maple leaves whispered against the night air. Inside, the only sound was my own steady breathing. The war had ended. And the silence wasn't empty. It was freedom. One crisp morning, I stepped onto the porch with coffee in hand and caught sight of the maple in my yard. Its young leaves, once pale green, had begun to blush with the faintest red at their edges. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Proof that roots had taken hold, that growth had begun beneath the soil where no one could see. I walked closer, crouching to touch the dark earth around the base. Solid, moist, settled. The stake I'd driven weeks ago held firm, guiding the trunk upward but no longer carrying its full weight. The tree was learning to stand on its own. I realized I was doing the same. My own roots, discipline, truth, boundaries, were sinking deeper every day. Betrayal had shaken me, but it hadn't snapped me. It had forced me to grow straighter, tougher, more deliberate. The maple's red leaves flickered in the breeze like a quiet flag of survival, and in their reflection, I saw myself. VO. The paper they wanted me to sign could have stolen my entire life. Instead, I chose truth over convenience, evidence over noise. They built a trap out of my integrity, but it was my faith in the law that dismantled it. I didn't just walk out of that delivery room. I walked out of a counterfeit life. Betrayal tried to chain me with silence, with pressure, with lies dressed as family. But silence can also be a weapon when you choose it. My voice was steady. My proof was undeniable. And the gavel turned their design into dust. I am not defined by what I lost. I am defined by what I refuse to accept. And today, the only signature on my future is mine. CTA. If it were you, would you forgive or would you walk away? Comment respect and hit subscribe for the next chapter of truth.